Hi, I'm Stephen Horn. I'm a professional herbalist and natural healer, and I'm also the father of 5 children. That's why I'm pleased today to be able to present to you this program on holistic approaches to learning problems. This is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart because when I was growing up, I did not like public school at all. In fact, I actually, when I was in junior high school, I came up with a slogan that I maintained for myself that I was not going to let school interfere with my education. Because I made the decision, I sort of was a B student, B+ student in junior high and an A- student in high school and an A student in college. But I sort of kind of studied what I wanted to study, and I didn't make too big of a deal about it. And I guess I was smart enough that I kind of coasted along without trying to get straight A's or anything. But a big part of my issue with public school has to do with the criticism and the self-esteem problems that can arise from the way we teach children in public school. When a child has problems with learning, they can get labeled with all kinds of very negative labels, and those kind of labels can haunt them for years to come and can interfere with their performance as an adult. And there is no reason for this, since for many of these learning problems there are very, very simple solutions that parents can apply that can help their children be successful in school, get a good education, and thus set a good foundation for confidence in the rest of their lives. So to begin with, I want to explain a little bit of my philosophy about health by using a model that I use a lot called the disease tree. And what the disease tree says is that different kinds of health problems, both physical and mental and emotional problems, all arise from certain common causes. We all have a constitution, that's a genetic makeup that we got from our parents and our grandparents that gives us certain inherent strengths and weaknesses, and that could be likened to the soil in which the tree grows. Into the soil comes 4 root causes of our health problems. These 4 root causes are mental and emotional stress, nutritional deficiencies, physical trauma, and toxins. And learning disabilities have these same 4 causes. Certain kinds of mental and emotional stress will cause learning disabilities. Nutritional deficiencies can cause learning disabilities. Physical injuries can cause learning disabilities, and so can environmental toxins. Now, in this program, we are not going to talk about physical trauma. That's a totally separate subject. What we're going to focus on is causes of learning disabilities that have to do with nutrition, environmental toxins, and certain specific mental and emotional imbalances. And so by the end of this program, we're going to cover a wide variety of tools that parents and in some cases teachers can use to improve kids' abilities to learn and help overcome learning problems. Our overview here is we're going to have basically 3 parts to this program. First, we're going to talk about nutrition in the brain and how nutrients and diet affect the brain and things we can do to improve the diet to improve learning. Part 2, we're going to talk about toxins in the brain, and we're going to talk about how food allergies and certain kinds of environmental toxins interfere with learning and what we can do about that. And in part 3, we're going to talk about some tools for specific learning problems. We're going to specifically talk about attention deficit disorder and dyslexia, but we're also going to give you some other tools to work with other kinds of learning difficulties. So with that in mind, let's get started, and let's start first of all and talk about nutrition and your brain. The brain needs proper nutrition. In fact, it might be argued that the brain is the most nutritionally sensitive organ in the entire body. That nutritional deficiencies are likely to affect the brain even before they affect physical health. A lot of the irritability, learning disorders, lack of concentration, hyperactivity, nervousness, anxiety, and so forth that people, adults and children, suffer in today's world have a lot to do with our poor diet, particularly the problems with refined carbohydrates and nutrient-depleted foods. So let's look a little more closely at nutrition in your brain. The brain is the most sensitive organ to nutritional deficiencies and imbalances. So it's going to show up there first. Intestinal health influences brain function because your intestines produce neurotransmitters and therefore communicate information to the brain. So if your digestive system is off, it's going to affect your brain. And the third point is that the brain is highly sensitive to changes in blood sugar levels. So blood sugar problems, hypoglycemia and diabetes in particular, have a tremendous impact on brain function. And that's actually where we're going to start. So we're going to look at sugar and the brain. And the first fact is that the brain uses more sugar than any other organ. So sugar is primarily a food for brain and muscle tissue. And the brain can take up to 20% of the sugar in the body. The brain is the only organ in the body that takes up sugar without insulin. This means that the brain takes sugar directly from the bloodstream without needing insulin. The purpose of the pancreas is to regulate the amount of sugar in the blood so that the amount of sugar reaching the brain stays stable. That's because if there's too much sugar in the blood, the brain is overstimulated. And if there is too little sugar in the blood, then the brain is understimulated and doesn't function properly. So your blood sugar level has a direct impact on both your mood and how well you learn. And this is incredibly true of children. Because of the high amount of refined carbohydrates in the modern American diet, we're talking about white sugar, refined flour, high fructose corn syrup, polished rice, these kinds of refined grain cereal products and simple sugars are just in overload in our diet. When you take in a lot of sugar, it triggers a release of insulin because that excess sugar in the blood is hyperstimulating to the brain, and the body has to get it out of the bloodstream in order to stabilize the blood sugar level. So the pancreas secretes insulin, which takes the sugar out of the blood and stores it in the liver and in the muscles in the form of something called glycogen. Glycogen is like animal starch. It's a way that the body has of storing sugar for future use. The glycogen in your muscles is there so that when you have to have a burst of physical exertion, like when you're running or something, there is sugar already present in the muscles that can be rapidly converted into sugar for fuel for your activity. The glycogen stores in the liver are primarily there to help the brain, so that when the blood sugar level drops, the pancreas secretes another hormone called glucagon, which causes the sugar in the liver to mobilize to bring the blood sugar level back up. Since glucagon and insulin are antagonists, when you're constantly eating a lot of simple sugar and refined carbohydrates, your body hypersecretes insulin. That depresses glucagon. The sugar goes into storage, and then when your sugar gets low and the brain needs more sugar, glucagon production is depressed. So the sugar level drops too low in the blood, and you suffer from a problem called hypoglycemia. Hypo meaning low, glycemia meaning sugar in the blood. So all that means is it's a fancy way in Latin of saying low blood sugar. When you get that low blood sugar, you crave more carbohydrates, you eat more carbohydrates, jack up the sugar and insulin levels, and your blood sugar goes on a roller coaster throughout the day, and so does your mood. Now, here are some of the symptoms that someone might be having problems with hypoglycemia. One of them, and the first on the list, is hyperactivity. Hyperactivity is linked to blood sugar swings, and a lot of children are hyper simply because they're hypoglycemic. Lack of attention. The hyperactivity comes when the sugar is high. The lack of attention tends to come when the sugar is low, as does depression. Temper tantrums are often a sign of blood sugar problems in children. Juvenile delinquency, generally speaking, most juvenile delinquents are hypoglycemic, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Bedwetting in children is often a sign of blood sugar imbalances. Suddenly having a cold nose or cold limbs is a sign that your blood sugar level has dived below normal, as is sudden shakiness, a sudden feeling of mental confusion, or being suddenly irritable and cranky. Also, cravings for sugar, wanting to eat sugar constantly, is another sign of hypoglycemia. So we can see right away that a lot of the problems that children are experiencing that are making them challenging, the irritability, to temper tantrums and everything, are really related to blood sugar problems. Now, I think if most parents understood how much easier it is to be a parent if you don't feed your kids refined carbohydrates, I think most parents would jump at the opportunity to get their kids on a proper hypoglycemic diet. When my children were young, we had no refined sugar, no white flour in the house, and every babysitter that ever came to sit our children always said we had the best behaved children they had ever seen. Now, we weren't like 100% strict on this, so it was really interesting for me to note, like when we let my kids go out trick-or-treating on Halloween and let them eat the Halloween candy, how irritable, cranky, and difficult they became to deal with within hours of eating that sugar. And later in my other marriage, I had a stepson, and I could tell he was very severely hypoglycemic. His mom was not very careful about feeding him sugar. And I remember many times that some things happened, like this one incident I remember when we went to the county fair. My stepson was going along, he was perfectly calm, he was perfectly happy, and then my wife bought him some cotton candy. And within 5 minutes of eating that cotton candy, he was irritable, cranky, and difficult to get along with. Because you understand that his blood sugar level had just gone up, and now he was hyperactive and overstimulated and difficult to deal with, and my wife was yelling at him. And my thought was, you just bought him the cotton candy. It's like if parents could just open their eyes and see and really observe the effect that sugar has on their kids, they would realize that their job as a parent would become like 10 times easier if they got rid of the refined sugar and simple carbohydrates in their family. Now, there's a book that's on this. It's very interesting. It's called Food, Teens, and Behavior by Barbara Reed. And Barbara Reed was a parole officer, and what she found is that juvenile delinquents are usually hypoglycemic, and putting them on a good diet kept them out of trouble with the law. Barbara Reed found out that she was hypoglycemic and went on a diet to improve hypoglycemia. And then she began noticing that a lot of the juvenile delinquents that she was a parole officer for lived on junk food: hamburgers, French fries, soda pop, milkshakes, candy bars, etc. was like the staples of their diet. And she had noticed, for example, that sometimes they couldn't remember what they had done, because when your blood sugar dips to a certain level, you actually lose conscious understanding of what you're doing. You're literally reacting sort of like an animal, out of animal instinct, and when you come out of it, you don't even remember what you did. And she started to notice this, and so she came up with a test for hypoglycemia, and she started getting some of her parolees to eat properly, and she was so successful with it that the judge started ordering all of the juvenile delinquents to take this hypoglycemic test. And if they were hypoglycemic, as a condition of their parole, they had to learn to eat properly from her. What she reports in the book is none of the kids who got on the hypoglycemic diet ever got in trouble with the law again. I also knew a psychologist who had been kicked out of the psychiatric profession for, in his own words, quote, teaching the heresy that nutrition had something to do with mental health, end quote. Anyway, he had been a psychiatrist over the prison system in the state in which he lived. And they had 12 prisoners who were so out of control that they They had to be kept in solitary confinement because they were constantly picking fights. They were irritable, they were cranky, they were difficult to get along with. He checked those 12 prisoners for hypoglycemia along with 12 of the prison staff as a control group. He found that the degree to which they were out of control perfectly matched the degree to which they suffered from hypoglycemia. So he made only 3 changes to their diet. Are you ready? No sugar, no caffeine, and a peanut butter sandwich at bedtime. Now the reason for the peanut butter at bedtime is because the nut butter stabilizes your blood sugar level. He didn't even go so far as to try to eliminate refined grains, just no sugar, no caffeine, and a peanut butter sandwich at bedtime. It took only 2 weeks for all of those prisoners to become well-behaved and balanced and normal on that diet. He told me that when he told his supervisor in the state prison, the state psychiatric system about his little study, that he was told, very interesting study, and if you ever mention it to anyone, you're fired. Sometime a few months later, he happened to be talking with another psychiatric colleague. He mentioned what he had done, and he was fired within a few days. There is almost a conspiracy. I hate to use the word conspiracy, but the junk food industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they have a lot of funding to control the information that gets out on nutrition. And so it's like this information, for some reason, just is so badly suppressed, and it's a shame because we could solve a lot of our problems with juvenile delinquency, crime, and learning disabilities in our kids in schools by doing this. Fortunately, there is movement afoot, and this is largely being motivated by the problems with children having with obesity, not by learning difficulties, but it's still a good move, of getting soda pop and candy bar machines out of our schools. As this kind of thing happens, and as we get our kids off this junk food, not only will we notice a decline in the amount of obesity in young kids and teenagers, but we'll also find that a lot of behavioral problems will clear up, since hypoglycemia is a major underlying cause of many learning disabilities in children. So, here's what you do to balance blood sugar. No refined sugars, no white flour, no polished white rice, no alcohol or caffeine, and for some people who are severely hypoglycemic, even fruit juice is a problem and should be eliminated for a while. The diet should consist of whole grains, proteins, fresh fruits, and vegetables. And meals should be small, frequent meals. It's best when you're hypoglycemic to eat 6 times a day. In other words, have some nuts on hand and some fresh fruit and so forth, and eat little snacks all day long that consist of things that have protein and fat and are complex carbohydrates. That helps to maintain a balanced blood sugar level. And by the way, it also is a great way to lose weight. Now, there are also some supplements that you can take that also assist in the problem of balancing blood sugar and helping get over hypoglycemia. And these include B-complex vitamins, particularly B-complex vitamins with vitamin C, which helps reduce stress levels. Licorice root, which is an herb I use a lot with children who are addicted to sugar because it reduces cravings for sugar and stabilizes blood sugar levels. Spirulina and other algae products like chlorella, blue-green algae, and so forth supply amino acids that stabilize blood sugar levels. Also, eleuthero root and other adaptogenic herbs in some cases will reduce stress levels and also balance blood sugar. And there's a really great supplement that will help balance blood sugar levels and reduce stress in kids called Mineral Chi Tonic. It consists of a blend of Chinese herbs with colloidal minerals, which I think is another great product to consider. Now, one of the things that can really help children, we're again talking still about nutrition and blood sugar, can really help children to perform better in school is to eat a good breakfast. Breakfast is very important. There's studies that actually showed that kids who skipped breakfast performed better in school than kids who ate carbohydrates for breakfast. But kids who had protein and good quality fats for breakfast outperformed all the other kids. So you want some kind of protein for your kids with breakfast. Eggs, protein powder, red meat, and it's also good for them to have some kind of fat, a spoonful of coconut oil, some butter, some cream, some avocado, anything of that nature. Of course, eggs are both a protein and a fat source. Those proteins and fats for breakfast, our hydrochloric acid production is strongest in the morning. Hydrochloric acid is the digestive secretion that helps break down proteins. So the fact that our hydrochloric acid is highest in the morning suggests that the time to eat protein the most is in the morning, not in the evening. Hydrochloric acid production is lowest in the evening. Most people don't do it that way. They eat a light breakfast and a heavy dinner. It's better to eat a hearty breakfast and a light dinner. That helps with both weight, but it also helps with blood sugar regulation. If you get up and you actually feed your kids, some good organic bacon or some kind of meat or protein or beans and eggs and things like that, you actually are getting them off to a better start. Their blood sugar level will be much more stable through the day. They won't crave sugar as much. They won't get on the blood sugar roller coaster. They will learn better, and their mood will be more stable. The worst thing that you can feed your kids in the morning is those boxed, sugar-sweetened breakfast cereals. Even the ones that aren't sugar-sweetened are still a very, very poor way to start the day. Now, it's okay sometimes to start the day with a whole grain cereal, like oatmeal or so forth, but if you're going to have that, you should put some butter and cream with it, because having a little butter and cream with it, and I prefer that people use organic dairy products because they have less toxins in them, but if you put some butter and cream with it, it stabilizes the blood sugar and keeps you from getting on that blood sugar roller coaster. There's a reason why people ate these foods in those traditional ways. So the best thing for breakfast, again, is protein with some good quality fat, not things like pancakes, and especially not sugar-sweetened breakfast cereals. Now, another aspect of nutrition that's really important, and part of the reason why starting off with protein is important, is because the neurotransmitters that communicate messages in your brain are all based on amino acids. So deficiencies of amino acids will create problems with the neurotransmitters in your brain. For example, serotonin is produced from tryptophan, ephedrine is produced from tyrosine, dopamine from phenylalanine, and GABA from glutamine. So if you're getting a complete protein for breakfast, it will help to make a better neurotransmitter balance, which helps to make your brain function better. Now, sometimes where it's hard to get the good breakfast, helping take some kind of amino acid supplement in the morning, along with a teaspoon of coconut oil or some other good fat, will go a long ways towards counterbalancing that. So super algae, which is a blend of different algae products, or spirulina, or a product containing all 22 of the amino acids in a free form. In some cases, individual amino acid supplements may help with specific problems. And in some cases, taking a little protease, which is a protein digesting enzyme, or hydrochloric acid, if someone has a hard time breaking down protein, can be helpful too. Because when you are getting adequate protein, it helps to stabilize your brain function. You actually, when you get a good quality protein, especially in the morning, you can think more clearly. You also have more mental flexibility. Not getting adequate protein can make you very mentally rigid and interfere with your ability to learn. Now, I've mentioned the importance of fats. Well, fats are extremely important for healthy brain function. The brain needs good fats. Fatty acids are critical for brain function because nerves are 50% fat. So the major thing, when someone calls you a fathead, thank them for the compliment. The trans fats that are present in processed foods and the fried greasy foods at restaurants and so forth actually interfere with nerve functions. They are not good fats to help the brain. And extremely low fat diets are not good for mental health, and especially not good for the health of children. Some people, in their urge to get on the low-fat thing, don't feed their children a lot of fat, and children need more fat than adults do because it helps their developing brain and mental capacity. And in my experience, kids like fats. I mean, I've seen kids like just eat a spoonful of butter or eat a spoonful of flaxseed oil or chew up a vitamin A and D tablet or omega-3 essential oil tablets. Most children will take fat supplements quite readily because their bodies crave fats. What you want to make sure is your children are getting good fats. Now, good fats include any of the following. Grass-fed organic butter, that's from cows that have been raised in pastures. Fish oils, such as cod liver oil or omega-3 essential fatty acid supplements. Deep ocean fish, wild salmon, not farm-raised salmon, wild salmon, tuna, sardines, kipper snacks. I mentioned the omega-3. Coconut oil is a really good fat, as is flaxseed oil and avocados and various nuts like walnuts and so forth. So you want to make sure that your child gets at least 1 or 2 of these kinds of fats every morning for breakfast, along with some protein. And these good fats will help brain development. Now, particularly in the fish, there is a substance called DMAE, which is a particular fat that's been shown to really enhance mental development and brain function. So it's related to the omega-3 essential fatty acids. So I have a good friend, Kimberly Ballas, who does programs with me from time to time. She's a naturopath. When she was pregnant with her daughter Allie, she had sushi like at least 2 or 3 times a week. And her daughter Allie has got one of the most brilliant little minds of any little kid I have ever seen in my life. And I really think that her eating that fish had a lot to do with it, because it's been definitely shown that those deep ocean fish like the tuna and the wild salmon and so forth actually help enhance brain function. So grass-fed or organic grass-fed beef and eggs that are from pastured chickens, all of these foods actually do have tremendous beneficial effects for brain health. Now, bad fats, the stuff that's not going to help your kids develop healthy brain, include partially hydrogenated or processed vegetable oils, margarine, shortening, commercial fried foods like you get at all of the fast food places, and animal fats from factory farmed animals. We're talking about animals that are raised in feedlots that aren't allowed to graze on pasture. The fat composition of animals that are raised in confined feedlots on animal chow is incredibly different than the fat composition of animals that are allowed to graze naturally. So you don't get good fats from the other. So in summary, here are a few of the supplements that may very well help brain health. One of them is B-complex vitamins, which help stabilize energy production and help the nervous system. Spirulina or other algae for the amino acids they contain. Cod liver oil or omega-3. And with that, fat-soluble vitamins, because fat-soluble vitamins help protect brain tissue against environmental toxins. These are all supplements you may want to consider if your child has some learning disabilities. Now, to summarize this section on nutrition, the brain is highly sensitive to nutritional deficiencies. So if your kid is on a junk food diet, he's going to have a junk food brain. And most kids in our society today have junk food brains, and you can see it in their behavior. Children who are fed whole foods tend to be more cooperative, less agitated, less irritable, easier to communicate with, and also learn better and faster and retain better than kids who are being fed empty calorie foods. The biggest issue here is blood sugar. Eating all of the refined carbohydrates is one of the major things that contributes to irritability, behavioral problems, and learning disabilities in your children. If you really knew how much easier your job would be as a parent if you could get your kids off refined carbohydrates, you would make every effort to do it. The problem is that means that you probably should do it too, because you can't make your kids do something that you're not willing to do yourself. There's a story that is told about Gandhi. Some parents brought their child to Gandhi and said that the child had been diagnosed with a disorder that he had to get off sweets. And they'd been trying to get the child to stop eating sweets, and they had been unsuccessful. And would Gandhi please talk to the child? And Gandhi said, bring the child back in 2 weeks and I'll talk to them. So 2 weeks later, the parents came. Gandhi spoke to the child for a few minutes, and lo and behold, the child went off sweets. And the parents came back and they were elated, and they wanted to know, what did you say to the kid? And why did you have to wait 2 weeks? And Gandhi said, I had to wait 2 weeks to see if I could stay off sweets for 2 weeks. And so when I saw the child, I said, I did it, you can do it too. So it starts with being a good example to our children. Your mood will be more stable, and you will learn better, and you'll be amazed how much better you feel, and probably half of your health problems will go away. Half of your health problems will go away if you go on a diet to balance your blood sugar levels. Not only that, you'll be preventing a lot of chronic and degenerative disease at the same time. Now let's move on to section 2. We're going to talk about the brain and chemical sensitivity. The brain is nutritionally sensitive, but the brain is also chemically sensitive. So toxins have a huge effect on the brain. So here are some facts about toxins in the brain. First of all, food allergies can affect brain function. So the types of foods you eat can have an impact on your brain function. Heavy metals, which are very prevalent in our society, are major causes of learning disabilities and behavioral disorders in children. And there are also other environmental toxins which can also damage the brain and nervous system tissue. So it's very, very important that we also, if children have learning problems or behavioral problems, that we screen them for toxins. Now, one source of toxins is kind of unusual in this regard, and that is that some children are just allergic to certain foods. And food allergies actually can trigger behavioral problems. So here are some of the things that food allergies can contribute to: hyperactivity, restlessness, irritability and fussiness, fuzzy thinking, meaning not being able to think clearly, and aggression. There are some times when kids eat certain foods, not only will they get hyper and cranky and irritable, but they may even get aggressive. And the exact foods that can trigger these kind of behaviors in children vary from child to child. But if you start watching how your children respond to what they eat, you may actually start to pick up that some of your children have food allergy problems. One of the reasons why this is a problem is because histamine, which is released in allergic reactions, actually is a neurotransmitter in the brain. And so the release of excess histamine in the body affects brain function. Now, some common allergy-causing foods, these are the most common ones, include wheat, corn, dairy, eggs, oranges, peanuts, beans, chocolate, shellfish, soy, and tomatoes. Now, there are other foods that people may be allergic to, but the big ones are actually the first column on that list: wheat, corn, dairy, eggs, oranges, and peanuts. Now, I had a son who was extremely allergic to dairy foods. If he had even just a little bit of dairy, you'd see redness around his eyes, he'd get poofy around his eyes, and he would become incredibly fussy and irritable. And so if you gave him, we used a herbal formula called ALJ to kind of counteract that allergic reaction, and it would like have an immediate effect in calming him down and taking some of the redness out of his eyes. But all it took was eating a little bit of dairy, and that kid was like really fussy and irritable and difficult to deal with. So sometimes you just really have to take a look at these issues and screen for food allergies. The way you do this is by using what's called an elimination diet. you put the child, or if you're doing this for yourself, on a very bland diet consisting of things like brown rice, vegetables, fresh fruits, and so forth, and eliminating all suspected allergy-causing foods. You do that for like 3 days, and notice if symptoms improve. If they improve, then reintroduce foods that are suspected to be allergens, causing allergic reactions, back into the diet, one food at a time, and watch how the child responds to them. So if you go on this kind of a bland diet for 3 days, for example, and then you give the kid some dairy, and all of a sudden, within an hour after eating the dairy, you see mood and behavior changes in the child, you're dealing with a dairy allergy. And every time that kid eats dairy, they're going to have that reaction that's going to be affecting their brain in a negative way. So in addition, of course, to the food allergies, we also have environmental toxins. And the chief one to worry about here is heavy metals. There are some major heavy metals. Mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, and aluminum are the major culprits, although there's numerous other ones. And these heavy metals can cause learning disabilities, mental retardation, memory loss, behavioral disorders, nervousness, and emotional instability. To look specifically, mercury, which is one of those heavy metals, causes insanity, epilepsy, paralysis, and can be a contributing factor in multiple sclerosis. And lead, which is another major one, can cause brain dysfunction, reduced cognitive abilities, a reduction in IQ, and major personality changes. And these are two of the main heavy metals that cause learning disorders in children. The biggest source of mercury that most kids have been exposed to, and most adults, is the silver amalgam fillings, which are 50% mercury and leach mercury into the body. Another major source of mercury toxicity is vaccines. There are a number of vaccines that contain mercury compounds. These are injected straight into the blood system, and in some cases have damaging effects on children's nervous systems. But mercury is one of the big things. It's suspected that mercury is the cause of autism, and there is also a connection between mercury and attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADHD. So mercury toxicity may be playing a huge role in this. Since most kids have been vaccinated, a lot of kids have had amalgam fillings, and mercury is quite prevalent in the environment. Mercury toxicity is a big problem that may be very adversely affecting our children. If any of you ever read Alice in Wonderland's, Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland book, there is a character in there called the Mad Hatter. When they have the tea party with the Mad Hatter and the March Hare. The reason why the Hatter is mad is in England it was very common for hatters to go insane, and the reason why is because they used mercury to press the hats, and so they would get mercury poisoning and it would literally make them insane. And lead poisoning from lead paint in old houses and other sources, lead can be found in pottery and so forth, is a major cause of mental retardation and serious learning disabilities in children. If heavy metals may be a problem, doing some heavy metal detoxification may help. And some of the supplements that are useful for this include a herbal formula called Heavy Metal Detox, a product called Megakel, which I find is helpful for lead, heavy metal detox more for mercury. Milk thistle or milk thistle combination, which contains vitamin C and N-acetylcysteine, can be helpful. N-acetylcysteine is something that helps the body get rid of heavy metals. It promotes glutathione in the liver. And your essential fatty acids, because they help to bind the heavy metals and carry them out of the body. So if you suspect that this may be a problem, talk to a good herbalist, nutritionist, or holistic physician and see if you can get some help with coming up with a program to help detoxify your child of heavy metals. Now, another major problem that is related to toxicity in children is problems with the gastrointestinal tract, and it has to do with leaky gut syndrome. The gastrointestinal tract not only breaks down and absorbs nutrients, it's also a first line of defense against pathogens, bacteria, viruses, fungus, and chemical irritants. Well, when you get intestinal inflammation from a poor diet, or you get an upset of the friendly bacteria due to the use of antibiotics and certain other medications, you can develop a problem called leaky gut syndrome. This chronic intestinal inflammation causes the membranes in the intestine to lose their defensive capability, so toxins and irritants from the environment are more readily absorbed, and this can cause a lot of agitation, irritation, and can contribute to learning disabilities. Some of the health problems where you often find leaky gut connected to it include attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADHD, asthma, autism, depression, dull thinking, fatigue, irritability, lethargy, and loss of memory. So children who have some of these kinds of problems may have a tendency to leaky gut syndrome, and they may need some supplements to improve the function of their intestinal tract. Now, part of this is going to be getting back to that nutrition, good nutrition in the beginning, but here are some supplements that could help. Getting some fiber into them, a little psyllium or slippery elm or something like that. The formula of kudzu, or kudzu St. John's wort, or just straight kudzu, is really good at toning up leaky gut, as is the single herb cat's claw, or a combination containing cat's claw. Also, probiotics, which are friendly bacteria like Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidophilus and Lactobacillus reuteri and other species, can help to restore the friendly flora and get rid of yeast infections. And last of all, digestive enzymes, papaya mint tablets, so forth, may also be helpful for kids who have problems with leaky gut syndrome. Now, in addition, I also want to mention that there are a lot of other solvents that can cause learning problems. And interestingly enough, many household cleaners and antibacterial soaps contain chemical toxins that have been shown to interfere with brain function and cause learning disabilities. So one of the other things you can do to help your kids be smarter and to also help overcome learning disabilities is to get rid of all of your toxic household cleaning products and replace them with environmentally safe, non-toxic, biodegradable household cleaning products. Your kids will be healthier, you'll be healthier, and you'll be avoiding doing damage to their nervous system. In addition to mercury, the petrochemical solvents, and some of these are sometimes found in vaccines, but they're also found in spot removers and stain removers and dry cleaning agents and so forth, actually eat the nervous system tissue and damage the nerves. And so you want to minimize your exposure to these chemical substances in order to help your children maximize their potential with learning. Now we're going to move into the third stage of this program. We're going to talk about some specific tools to enhance learning and deal with different kinds of specific learning problems. And our first thing that we're going to look at is understanding that there are 4 basic different types of learners. This is really valuable information, will help you understand your children and communicate more with them. These 4 types of learners are auditory learners, which I call emotional spontaneous types, visual learners, which I call analytical thinking types, touch/movement learners, which I call active kinesthetic types, and multisensory learners, which include what are called extremist innovative types. Now, the easiest way to tell which type of these learners your child is to look in their eyes, because the pattern of their iris will tell you what their dominant learning mode is. So this next picture shows an emotional spontaneous type. You see all the little rounded openings in the iris? This is an auditory learner. And the next slide is also an example of an auditory learner. See all the little rounded openings in the eyes? This means the person is emotional and spontaneous. So here are some of the characteristics of that type. They're open, flexible, spontaneous, creative. They make decisions based on feelings. They learn best by auditory input. If you talk to them, they'll remember better than any other way. However, they're visual communicators, demonstrative, tend to use a lot of gestures. And when they get something, they'll tend to go, oh, or ooh, or wow, or okay, or something. They'll make an O sound, which means that they have got it. They've received the information. So the best way to help an emotional spontaneous type learn is to talk to them. Give them verbal instructions. Also, give them verbal affirmations and words of love and affection, because that's the primary way that they will hear love and positive reinforcement. Now the next type, the analytical thinking type, we have a picture that shows this. You see all those little spots in the pattern. That's what signifies the analytical thinking type, which is the visual learner. The characteristics of visual learners are they're skeptical, thoughtful, deliberate, and analytical. Their decisions are primarily based on thinking. They are visual learners, meaning that they learn best by seeing charts, reading books, or seeing some kind of visual demonstration of what it is you want them to learn. They're auditory communicators. They like to use words, and they love to use big, fancy words, and generally have a very good vocabulary. When they get it, they tend to make some more subdued kind of sounds, such as huh, or or huh, or So the best way to help them learn is by showing them charts, giving them books to read, showing them pictures. This accesses their visual learning mode. You communicate love to them best this way, writing them a love note or giving them something visual to look at that is a sign of praise. Now this next type, and this is the one that's big, is the active kinesthetic type, the kind that learns through touch and movement. Notice the nice straight iris fibers, the lack of spots, and the lack of rounded openings in the eye. This is the child who is most likely to be labeled as hyperactive or attention deficit even when they're not. This is because active kinesthetic types have the characteristics of being sensory, empathetic, and balanced. They make decisions based on gut instinct, but they learn through imitation and communicate through touch and movement. What this means is that they move as they learn. So they often have a very hard time sitting still. When they get it, they'll go, So they learn best through apprenticeship, through having you demonstrate something and having them imitate it. Active kinesthetic learners need kinesthetic things to enhance their learning experience. They do well if they get involved with dance, sports, or anything that allows them to move with their body. Because they tend to move when they're learning, they're often labeled as hyperactive by the public school system. Because they're not learning primarily through listening or seeing, they're learning through imitating. They are also tend to be the one who kind of tends to act up a little bit more in class. So I've seen many kinesthetic children who are pretty normal. They're just busy, active children who need an outlet for their kinesthetic energy to be able to do something in order for them to enhance their learning experience. And they're being labeled as hyperactive because they don't learn very well when they're sitting still. Please, if you have a kinesthetic learner as a child, do not allow the public school to label them as attention deficit and put them on drugs. Don't. No. Get them involved in dance, sports, anything that allows them to move. It will help them be calmer, and it will help them perform better in school. Now, the last learning type is actually a mixed learner, and their iris pattern will look something like the following. You notice that there are both spots and rounded openings in this eye. These are multisensory learners, meaning they learn through a combination of auditory, visual, and kinesthetic movements. So their characteristics are, they tend to be restless, progressive, dynamic, and disconnected. They tend to vacillate in making decisions. They are touch movement learners. That is, they learn best through trial and error. And they're visual auditory communicators, meaning they're great at communicating, but the best way they learn is to let them just dig in and try it until they figure out what works. So they learn best through experimentation. Now, sometimes the extremist innovative types have real serious problems in public school because it's so regimented and they are so experimental. I am an extremist innovative type. It's part of the reason why I hated public school. It was too regimented for me. I am too creative, too innovative, too experimental to want to be put in that box. Some of the most famous inventors and people around were probably extremist innovative types and had serious problems in school. Einstein, for example, had serious problems in school. Thomas Edison had serious problems in school. The inventor of the Learjet had serious problems in school. A lot of very, very creative people have very serious problems with school because school is not designed to get you to learn. School is designed to get you to behave, to get a job, to do what you're told, to sit still, to focus on the task you're told to tell. It's a mistake to think that public education is designed as a learning experience. It's not. It's designed as a babysitting experience, partly for parents, but more than that, it's designed to turn out factory workers and soldiers, people who will fit into cogs in the social machine and do what they're told. So children who are highly creative often have an extremely difficult time in public school. Do not, if you have an extremist innovative child, let the school label them as a troublemaker. Instead, give them outlets for their creativity. Help them, pursue their interests. Let them do things that they can experiment and learn by trial and error. It will help them a lot. I want to give you a practical example of how this kind of information can really help you in communicating with your child and understanding your child. My stepson, who I mentioned earlier, was a kinesthetic learner. He primarily learned by physical movement, by imitating physical movement. He was a very poor auditory learner. He had some visual learning capability, but he had a very hard time understanding auditory instructions. One day, when we were driving in the car, he noticed the odometer in the car and he asked what it was. And I started explaining how it counted the miles, and he got all confused. He says, "I can't understand that." And he got all frustrated. So when we got home, I said, "Here, I'll help you understand." I got a ruler. I laid it on the floor. I got a toy car. I set it next to the ruler. I drove the toy car along the length of the ruler. So I said, "See, the car is moved from here to here on the ruler. So it's moved 1 inch. Now it's moved 2 inches. Now it's moved 3 inches. So if we have the little odometer," and I drew the little picture of the odometer, then see the odometer is going to go boom 1 inch, boom 2 inch, boom 3 inch, so forth. And I literally gave him a physical demonstration, had him drive the car and do the odometer thing, and he understood it perfectly. You have to be able to communicate information in the way a person can receive it. And unfortunately, one of the serious flaws of our public education system is we lump all types of learners together. We put a teacher who maybe is really good at being an auditory communicator or very good at being a visual communicator or something like that, but because they don't know how to involve students in who have all the different kinds of learning modes, they don't know how to communicate information, and children who don't respond to that teacher's communication style get labeled dumb. Big mistake, big problem. Don't let it happen to your kids. Look in your kids' eyes, do a little work, figure out what kind of learners they are, and start creating learning experiences for them that match their primary intake mode. Now, there's a little chart here that kind of summarizes this and also shows something. See, basically we have the world of our head, the world of our heart or feelings, and the world of our body. So the jewel type, which is the analytical extremist type, is mental, and they're a visual learner. The flower type is an emotional auditory learner. That's the emotional spontaneous person. These terms come from Ray iridology. The stream, or active kinesthetic type, is a physical type involved with the body, and the shaker, or the extremist innovative, is a mixed type. You can also tell these types by looking at how your children shift your eyes if you ask them questions, and they have to think about it for a minute. Visual learners will shift their eyes slightly up. Come back to me on the camera and we'll demonstrate this. Get a close-up here. I'll take off my glasses and zoom in. So when you ask a visual learner and they have to think about something, they'll go like that, or like that. This is depending on whether they're remembering when they look to one side, and they're imagining, the future, creating something the other side. Auditory learners tend to shift their eyes to the side like this. One side will be for thinking about something that happened, the other side for creating something. And kinesthetic will tend to look down like this, either to the one side or to the other. So if you don't, another way to do this is to watch your children's eyes when you ask them questions, and they have to think about it for a minute. And by the way, this is also helpful for understanding people in general. If you can figure out if your spouse is an auditory, visual, or kinesthetic person, you know better how to communicate with them, how to get information to them, how to solve things. So with that understanding that we have these different types of learners, let's also get into the first of our major learning disabilities, which is ADHD. So we're going to talk about some information about solving the mystery of ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder. To understand this, we need to understand that there are two branches to what's called the autonomic nervous system. This is the branch of our nervous system that works on autopilot, that pumps our heart, runs our digestive system, causes us to breathe, and so forth. These two branches are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And ideally, they should be in a kind of a state of balance. So as this slide shows, you've got the sympathetic on one side, the parasympathetic on the other side, and you want them to kind of be balanced. Now, sometimes one will be a little more active, sometimes the other one will be a little more active, but there should be kind of a balance between the two of them. Here are the functions of these two systems. The sympathetic creates an alert but focused state. It causes our muscles to tense. It dilates our pupils. That's very important to remember. It increases our blood pressure and heart rate. It inhibits our digestion. And an excess of sympathetic activity causes us to become nervous and anxious, and we experience what's called anxiety. So like right before you go to do something kind of a little bit scary, you experience this little bit of anxiety, which is your sympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic creates a relaxed but also hypersensitive state. Really important to remember that, hypersensitive. It relaxes muscles, contracts the pupils, makes them smaller, decreases blood pressure and heart rate, enhances digestion, but when it's in excess, it causes problems with paying attention. It causes a kind of a diffuse, multi-sensory thing. So this is really important to understand, because for a long time I couldn't figure out why certain individuals appeared to react backwards to nervine herbs. For example, you take an herb like lavender or valerian or skullcap, for example, which for most people causes them to enter into a greater state of relaxation, has a calming effect on them, reduces their anxiety, reduces their nervousness, reduces their stress. Well, there are some people that when you give them those things, they get hyper, they get agitated, it unnerves them, and that's what the ADHD person is they're the person who appears to react backwards to those nervines. Well, one day I finally figured out that they weren't reacting backwards. So normally stress and anxiety looks like this next slide, okay? You have too much sympathetic, you have too little parasympathetic. So you're taking a remedy that reduces the sympathetic and increases the parasympathetic. And that's what valerian and hops and skullcap and passion flower and lavender oil and so forth do. They decrease sympathetic activity, increase parasympathetic activity, which helps reduce those feelings of stress, nervous, and anxiety. But the ADHD person looks like this. They have a hyperactive parasympathetic nervous system with a deficient sympathetic nervous system. So when you give them those standard nervines that are supposed to relax you, it actually throws them farther out of balance, which makes them worse. So what is happening here is they actually calm down when you give them small doses of things that stimulate most people. So interestingly enough, the ADHD person tends to feel calmer when they have some caffeine. This explains why when a child is ADHD, giving a drug like Ritalin gets them calmer. Ritalin is actually speed. I want everybody to understand this. Ritalin is speed. It's an upper. It's an amphetamine. It's one of those things that makes a nice street drug like cocaine, because cocaine belongs to the same family of drugs as Ritalin. We're talking about speed, okay? We are dosing millions of children in this country with speed. We're telling them on the one hand, don't use drugs, and then we're dispensing them in school. And Ritalin is actually a very popular street drug. You can get high on it. So there's a mixed message going out with this. What we need to do is we need to find a better way to create balance in the nervous system without just pumping these kids full of speed. So let's look at again, that balance between the nervous system. Again, with sympathetic, you get increased mental focus, increased energy, decreased appetite, and decreased elimination. Whereas parasympathetic, you get decreased mental focus, a more relaxed, laid-back thing, increased appetite, and increased elimination. So when you're dealing with, there's some things I've learned about ADHD kids. First of all, generally speaking, they don't like to be caressed. They don't like to be lightly touched. This is because they're already in hypersensitive mode, and little noises, little touches, little things like that are highly agitating to them because they have a hard time filtering them out. I don't know if you're one of the people who found that you had to wait to the last minute to cram for an exam because you couldn't focus when you studied, but what's happening there is that when you're under a little bit of stress, when you're under the gun, it jacks up your sympathetic nervous system, which makes you more focused. Your sympathetic nervous system allows you to tune out distracting influences and get hyper-focused on one thing. Your parasympathetic causes you to become more diffuse. It opens up your hearing, your ears, and creates this more diffuse sensory input, which means that you're more easily distracted, and little things, you're more sensitive to little things, so little things get on your nerves more. Also, with the ADHD kids tend to like to push the envelope and get a little bit into trouble sometimes. Well, this makes a lot of sense if you understand the fact that little bit of danger when you're pushing the envelope and getting into trouble a little bit stimulates your adrenals, which release hormones that stimulate your sympathetic nervous system, gives you that little bit of stress response. And that actually makes someone with ADHD feel calmer and more relaxed. So, when you have a child that is agitated, hyperactive, some children who are hyperactive are actually just stressed. They're suffering from anxiety or nervousness. And that needs to be balanced out with some things to help them calm down a little bit. But some children who are hyper are ADHD, and so they need different remedies. So without having to just give them the remedies and have them get the wrong one and climb the wall, there's a really simple way we figured out to test this. And this is how you assess the balance between the sympathetic and nervous system. The first thing you do is you look at their pupils. It's called the pupil tonus. Look at the size of their pupils. If they're small, it's parasympathetic. If they're large, it's sympathetic. As another reaction, you can have them close their eyes and give them a sniff of lavender oil and then a sniff of lemon oil and observe their reaction. And you can also ask them a little bit about their appetite, digestion, and so forth. If their appetite's really good and they digest things really fast, that's another clue that they could be a parasympathetic dominant person. But I suggest that you might want to do a little bit, have a couple of essential oils, because some people just dislike a particular oil. But I just had an adult come into my office who their counselor had suggested that they might be a sufferer of adult ADHD. So to check her, I first looked at her pupils, and they were very small, which gave me the clue she's ADHD. Then I had her close her eyes and I had her smell lavender oil, which she wrinkled her nose and went like this, like, You tell it agitated her. And then I had her smell lemon, and she went, Well, lemon oil is stimulating, as is pink grapefruit, lime, or any other citrus oil. Those are all stimulating oils, whereas lavender and ylang-ylang and what's another one? Chamomile would all be relaxing oils. So if they get kind of agitated when they smell oils that are supposed to relax them, and relaxed when they smell oils that should be stimulating, that's another clue. So here again is a slide reminding us that the sympathetic dilates the pupil, opens it up, the parasympathetic contracts it. So next slide shows a picture of a dilated pupil. That's what a person would look like if their problem was due to anxiety, excess sympathetic nervous system, and that would tend to make them like this. People who have the large pupils tend to have emotional swings, fears, phobias, and paranoia, poor appetite and digestion, adrenal disorders, and they tend to be open and susceptible to stress. The person with the next slide, which is the contracted pupils, this is the person who tends to have the ADHD problem. And the characteristics of people with this are a tendency to bulimia and anorexic food disorders. They tend to be very changeable and have difficulty being still and calm. They're prone to anxiety and nervous disorders and have tendencies to ADHD. So to balance these out, here are some things that affect both sides of the nervous system. If a person is parasympathetic, then you need to give them remedies to enhance the sympathetic. So a little bit of caffeine in the form of guarana, green coffee bean, green tea, or chocolate actually will help them to be calmer. We used to use Chinese ephedra or ma wang to help calm them down. And of course they took it off the market. Now the ephedrine alkaloids are in the cold tablets, the cold medications, and they've actually pulled those off the shelves because they're having problems with that. Another way that you can get it is there's an herb called bitter orange that contains synephrine. That's another one that these are alternatives to using Ritalin, by the way. And licorice root can be very helpful for that. If it's just stress or anxiety, then look on the parasympathetic side to things like valerian skullcap, lavender, passion flower, lobelia, or kava kava. Also, there's some other remedies you can look at. Some helps for stress and anxiety include eleuthero root and other adaptogens, calming nervines, B-complex vitamins, and magnesium. And some other helps for ADHD include your sympathetic stimulants, your citrus essential oils, just having them put some on a little cloth and carry it around with them, adrenal supporting supplements, red meat in the morning for breakfast, which really helps stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. A lot of ADHD kids do tons better if they have steak for breakfast, or hamburger for breakfast, and iodine supplements. One of the things that we recently learned, my partner in my nutritional consulting business, Dr. Kimberly Ballas, who's a naturopath, we learned that iodine deficiency in a mother when she's having a child will tend to produce an ADHD child. Now, mercury displaces iodine, as does chlorine, bromides, and fluorides. So these may also be contributing factors to the development of ADHD. But many times, giving a child who's ADHD iodine supplements, as in iodoral, or liquid dulse, or seaweed extracts, will actually help to balance out their nervous system and make them more calm. Kim herself, by the way, we figured this out on her, is adult ADHD, and since she's been taking iodine, has found that she is able to remain much calmer and more relaxed and easygoing because the iodine stimulates her metabolism and basically acts as a little bit of an upper and balances out her system. There are a few other things that you should look at if a child has attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Screen them for food allergies because they often have food allergies that are involved with this. Also, leaky gut syndrome is a very common problem with children with ADHD. And oftentimes, vaccine damage or heavy metal poisoning, particularly with mercury, may also be a factor. So you may need to go back and look at some of those detoxification and dietary issues to help balance out the hyperactive child.